He bought a farm and was met by 3 giant women who said, "You're going to have sex with us." The bullet split the fence post 2 inches from Jake's head. He dropped flat against the dirt, heart hammering as splinters rained down on his back. 3 more shots cracked through the morning air, each one closer than the last. He rolled behind the water trough and yanked his revolver free, scanning the tree line where gun smoke drifted like gray ghosts. He had arrived at the Henderson farm less than an hour ago, his horse tired and his pockets empty. The old man who owned the place had seemed desperate for help, offering wages that were too good to refuse. Now Jake understood why nobody else had taken the job. A voice called out from the trees, rough and mocking. "You got until sunset to clear out, Henderson. This here land belongs to the Crimson Gang now." Jake risked a glance over the trough. 5 riders sat their horses at the edge of the property, rifles pointed his direction. Their red bandanas marked them clear as day. The Crimson Gang had a reputation that stretched across 3 territories, and none of it was good. Behind him, the farmhouse door creaked open. "Get inside, boy," the old man hissed. "This ain't your fight." But Jake had already made his choice the moment that first bullet flew. He had run from too many things in his 24 years. His father's disappointment, the law in Kansas, the memory of his brother's grave. He was tired of running. "I'm staying," Jake called back without taking his eyes off the riders. The leader of the gang, a tall man with a scar cutting down his left cheek, laughed. "Hear that, boys? The new hand thinks he's tough." Jake counted their weapons. 5 rifles, probably 6 shooters on their hips. He had his revolver and whatever the old man kept in the house. Not great odds, but he had survived worse. Almost. The scarred man spurred his horse forward a few steps. "Name's Cole Briggs. Maybe you heard of me." Jake had. Cole Briggs was wanted in 4 states for robbery and murder. The bounty on his head could buy this farm twice over. "I heard you're a coward who shoots farmers in the back," Jake shouted. The words hit their mark. Briggs's face darkened and his hand moved to his rifle. But another rider, younger with wild red hair, grabbed his arm and whispered something. Briggs nodded slowly, his anger shifting into something more dangerous. A cold smile. "You got spirit, kid. I respect that. But spirit don't stop bullets." He wheeled his horse around. Sunset. "You and the old man better be gone or we're burning this place to ash with you inside." The gang rode off, their laughter echoing across the fields. Jake stayed behind the trough until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did he let out the breath he had been holding. Henderson emerged from the house, his weathered face pale. "You're a fool for staying." "Those men don't make empty threats." Jake stood and holstered his weapon. "How long they been pushing you?" 3 weeks. Started with warnings, then they killed my 2 ranch hands." "Shot them down in cold blood." The old man's voice cracked. "I can't pay you enough to die for this place, son." Jake looked around the property. Neat fences, a sturdy barn, fields ready for planting. This was somebody's dream once. Maybe it still could be. "Tell me everything about the Crimson Gang," Jake said. "And then tell me every inch of this land. If we're making a stand, we better make it count." Henderson stared at him for a long moment, then slowly smiled. "You really are a fool. Come on inside. We got planning to do and not much time to do it." As they walked toward the house, Jake felt the weight of his decision settle on his shoulders. The sun was already climbing higher. Sunset would come fast. Henderson's kitchen table was covered in maps and papers. The old man cleared them with a sweep of his arm and pointed to the window. "They want this land because of what's under it. Found silver in the North Creek last month." Word got out somehow and the Crimson Gang came sniffing. Jake studied the property through the glass. Rolling fields stretched to the horizon, broken only by the creek that wound through the northern section like a silver snake. The barn stood solid and square, its red paint fading but its structure sound. Beyond that, rows of fruit trees marked where Henderson had once dreamed of an orchard. They could have just killed you and taken it. "Why the warnings?" Jake asked. "Because killing me makes noise." The sheriff in town might be lazy, but even he'd have to investigate a murder. They want me to run so they can claim I abandoned the deed. Henderson poured 2 cups of coffee with shaking hands. "Smart, in a ruthless sort of way. The law can't touch them if I just disappear?" Jake sipped the bitter coffee, his mind working through possibilities. "How many in the gang total?" "I've seen 8 different faces. The 5 today, plus 3 others who usually stay in town, keeping watch, spreading fear." Henderson sat down heavily in a chair that creaked under his weight. They got a hideout somewhere in the Copper Hills, about 10 miles north. Use it to stash stolen goods and lay low between jobs. Nobody knows exactly where, but I've tracked them part of the way. What about the town? Any law worth talking about? Sheriff's name is Price. He's either taking their money or too scared to stand up to them. Either way, he ain't no help. Henderson's face hardened. I went to him after they killed my hands. He said there wasn't enough evidence, that maybe they just rode off looking for better work. But I found blood. I found bullet casings. I found signs of a struggle. Jake walked through the house, checking sightlines in defensible positions. The farmhouse was solid, built by someone who knew how to work with their hands. Thick log walls that would stop most bullets. Small windows that made it hard for attackers to shoot in, but easy for defenders to shoot out. A root cellar that could serve as a last refuge if everything went wrong. You got more weapons than that old shotgun I saw? Jake asked. Henderson nodded and moved to a cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a key and unlocked it, revealing an arsenal that surprised Jake. My son's hunting rifle still in good shape, a Winchester repeater I bought during the Indian troubles, 2 Colt revolvers with plenty of ammunition, and some dynamite left over from clearing stumps last spring. Your son? Jake noticed how Henderson's voice had softened when he mentioned him. He died in the war. Confederate cavalry. Got shot at Gettysburg and died 3 days later from infection. The old man ran his hand over the rifle barrel, his eyes distant. He was only 19. Never got to see this place finished, never got to live the life we planned together. I kept his things, couldn't bring myself to sell them or give them away. Jake understood that kind of grief. His own brother had died just 2 years ago, thrown from a horse he was breaking. Jake had been in Kansas at the time, running from a gambling debt and the angry men chasing him. By the time he made it home, his brother was already buried. His father had looked at him with such disappointment that Jake had left that same night, unable to bear the weight of his failure. I'm sorry about your son, Jake said quietly. Life takes what it takes. We either keep going or we don't. Henderson closed the cabinet. What's your plan, boy? You got that look like you're scheming something. Jake moved to the window again, watching the shadows lengthen across the yard. The barn's got a hayloft with a clear view of all approaches, right? That's right. But it'll burn fast if they torch it. Haze is dry as kindling this time of year. What if we don't wait for them to come here? What if we take the fight to them first? Henderson's eyes widened. You want to attack the Crimson Gang? Just the 2 of us against 8 armed men? Not attack. Hit and run. Strike their hideout, destroy their supplies, scatter them. Make them understand that pushing you off this land is going to cost them more than it's worth. Jake turned from the window, his jaw set with determination. They're expecting scared farmers who'll either run or wait here to die. They're not expecting a fight on their own ground. That's crazy. That's suicide. Maybe. But so is sitting here waiting for sunset. At least this way we're taking action, controlling the situation instead of just reacting to it. Jake checked his revolver again, the familiar weight of it comforting in his hand. You said you tracked them part way to their hideout. How far did you get? Henderson studied Jake for a long moment, weighing the young man's resolve against the insanity of the plan. Then something shifted in his face, a spark of the fire that had driven him to build this farm in the first place. I got within a mile before I had to turn back. Followed their tracks through the canyon, saw the smoke from their campfire. That's enough. We can find them. Jake moved to the table and grabbed one of the maps. Show me exactly where you went. Henderson spread the map flat and traced a route with his finger. Here's the farm. You follow the creek north for about 5 miles, then cut west into the foothills. There's a canyon, real narrow, with walls that rise up maybe 60 feet on both sides. Their hideout's somewhere in there. That's perfect. Narrow canyon means they can't spread out, can't surround us easy. We go in fast, hit 'em hard, and get out before they know what happened. Jake's mind was already working through the details. We use the dynamite. One good blast to destroy their camp, scatter their horses, put the fear of God in them. And if we get trapped in that canyon, then we fight our way out. But they won't be expecting us, Henderson. That's our advantage. They think we're here, scared and waiting. They don't think we got the spine to come after them. The old man was silent for a moment, his weathered hands resting on the map. When he spoke again, his voice was stronger, more certain. My name's Frank Henderson. If we're going to die together, might as well be on a first-name basis. Jake smiled and extended his hand. Jake Marsh. And we're not going to die. We're going to show these outlaws what happens when they pick the wrong farm to steal. They shook on it, a pact sealed between two men who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Frank moved to the cabinet and started pulling out weapons and ammunition. We'll need to pack light, but pack smart. Take the dynamite, the Winchester, plenty of bullets. Leave the shotgun here in case we need it when we get back. How long to reach their hideout? 2 hours if we ride hard, maybe less if we push the horses. Frank loaded the Winchester and set it on the table. We leave now. We can hit them in the middle of the day when they're lazy and comfortable. Most of them will probably be sleeping or drinking. Jake helped pack the supplies into saddlebags. The dynamite went in carefully, wrapped in cloth to prevent accidental ignition. The fuses and matches went in a separate bag, waterproofed with wax paper. They filled canteens from the well and grabbed some dried beef and hardtack for the ride. Frank disappeared into his bedroom and came back wearing a gun belt with a Colt revolver on each hip. He moved with the confidence of a man who had worn guns before, who knew how to use them when necessary. "You were a soldier," Jake said. It wasn't a question. Texas Rangers before the war. Rode with them for 8 years, chasing Comanche raiders and Mexican bandits across the whole territory. Frank's eyes held memories of violence and glory in equal measure. That was a long time ago, but some things you don't forget, like how to shoot straight when it matters. They walked outside into the harsh afternoon sun. Jake's horse had rested enough to ride, its black coat gleaming with health. Frank saddled his own mount, a tough paint mare that had been with him for 15 years. You sure about this?" Frank asked one final time as they prepared to mount up. Jake looked back at the farmhouse, at the neat fences and the fields waiting to be planted. He thought about all the times he had run before, all the fights he had avoided, all the stands he had failed to make. His brother had died because Jake wasn't there when it mattered. He couldn't change the past, but he could change what happened today, I'm sure. Let's ride. They left the farm at a gallop, heading north toward the creek. The land rolled beneath them, grass giving way to scrub brush and scattered rocks as they climbed toward higher ground. Jake kept his eyes on the horizon, watching for any sign of the gang. The element of surprise was everything. The creek appeared as a green line cutting through the brown landscape, cottonwood trees marking its course. They followed it north, their horses' hooves splashing through shallow crossings, mud spraying up to fleck their pants. Frank pulled up beside Jake as they rode. "There's something I didn't tell you earlier. Cole Briggs, the one with the scar. He's wanted for killing a federal marshal last year. Shot him in the back during a bank robbery in Santa Fe. The reward on his head is $5,000. Jake whistled low. $5,000 was more money than most men saw in a lifetime. That's good to know. Makes us feel a bit more like justice than just survival. There's more. The red-haired kid riding with him, the one who grabbed his arm. That's Danny Cooper. His brother was one of the ranch hands Briggs killed. Danny joined up with them after, either out of fear or some twisted sense that they were stronger than any law. That information changed things. A man who betrayed his own brother's memory was unpredictable, dangerous in a different way than the others. He might be the weak link in the gang, the one most likely to break when pressure was applied. Or he might be the most vicious, trying to prove his loyalty by being more brutal than necessary. We'll keep an eye on him, Jake said. They rode in silence for another hour, the sun beating down on their backs, sweat soaking their shirts. The land grew rougher, rocks jutting from the earth like broken teeth. The copper hills rose ahead of them, their red stone faces glowing in the light. Frank raised his hand, signaling to stop. We're close now. Better go quiet from here. They dismounted and tied their horses to a twisted juniper tree that clung to life in the rocky soil. Jake checked the Winchester one more time, making sure the action was smooth and the magazine was full. Frank did the same with his revolvers, spinning the cylinders to verify each chamber held a round. You ready? Frank asked. As ready as I'll ever be. They moved forward on foot, using the rocks and scrub for cover. The canyon appeared ahead, a dark slash in the red stone, its entrance narrow enough that two men could barely ride through side by side. Perfect for an ambush, either way. Jake's heart pounded as they approached. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to find another way to avoid this confrontation. But he had listened to those instincts too many times before. Today, he would listen to something else. To courage, or foolishness, or whatever it was that made a man stand and fight instead of running away. The canyon walls rose up on either side, blocking out the sun and casting everything in shadow. The temperature dropped 10 degrees, the air damp and cool. Their footsteps echoed softly off the stone, each sound magnified in the confined space. Voices drifted down the canyon, carried by the wind. Laughter, the clink of bottles, the sound of men relaxed and unaware. Jake and Frank exchanged a glance and kept moving, their weapons ready. The hideout appeared around a bend in the canyon. It was exactly as Frank had described, an old mining shack that had seen better days. Half the roof had collapsed, but the other half looked solid enough to provide shelter. 3 horses were tied to a makeshift hitching post, their tails swishing at flies. 3 horses meant 3 men inside. Better odds than 8, but still dangerous if things went wrong. Frank gestured with hand signals they had worked out during the ride. He would circle around to the back of the shack while Jake prepared the dynamite. They would strike simultaneously, giving the outlaws no time to organize a defense. Jake watched Frank disappear into the shadows, moving with surprising stealth for a man his age. Those years as a Texas Ranger hadn't been forgotten. Then Jake turned his attention to the dynamite, carefully unwrapping one stick and attaching a fuse. His hands were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. 5 minutes passed, each second stretching like an hour. Jake's ears strained for any sound that might indicate Frank had been discovered. But all he heard was the continuing laughter from inside the shack, the casual conversation of men who believed themselves safe. When the 5 minutes were up, Jake struck a match and lit the fuse. It sparked to life, burning fast. He stepped to the edge of the shack, drew back his arm, and hurled the dynamite through the open window. Then he ran. The explosion came 3 seconds later, a blast that shook the ground and sent chunks of wood and stone flying through the air. The concussion wave hit Jake in the back, knocking him forward. He caught himself and spun around, the Winchester already coming up to his shoulder. The shack was a ruin. The already damaged roof was completely gone now, and one wall had collapsed inward. Smoke and dust billowed out in a choking cloud that filled the canyon. Through it, Jake could see movement, figures stumbling and falling. A man burst through the door, his clothes on fire, screaming. Jake aimed low and fired, the bullet catching him in the leg. The man went down hard, rolling in the dirt to extinguish the flames. Another outlaw tried to escape through the back but ran straight into Frank. The shotgun blast echoed off the canyon walls, and the outlaw didn't move again. The third man made it to the horses. He cut one loose and vaulted into the saddle, spurring the animal into a panicked run down the canyon. Jake tracked him with the rifle but didn't fire. One scared outlaw carrying tales back to the gang would serve their purpose better than another dead body. Inside the shack, the fire was spreading fast, feeding on old dry wood and whatever supplies the gang had stored there. Jake and Frank moved in carefully, weapons ready for any remaining threats. But the 2 outlaws who had been inside were either dead or unconscious, and the smoke was too thick to stay long. "Check for anything useful," Frank shouted over the roar of flames. "Then we get out." They worked fast, grabbing what they could. Bags of money, probably from recent robberies. A strongbox that was too heavy to carry but clearly valuable. Papers scattered across a makeshift desk, some with names and plans written in crude handwriting. Evidence that could hang the entire gang if it reached an honest lawman. "This is enough," Jake called out. "Let's move." They loaded everything onto the remaining 2 horses and led them down the canyon at a run. Behind them, the fire consumed the hideout completely, flames licking up the canyon walls, smoke rising into the sky like a black pillar visible for miles. The ride back to the farm was hard and fast. They pushed the horses to their limits, knowing that the surviving outlaw would reach the rest of the gang soon, and they would come looking for revenge. Every minute counted now. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when they finally reached Henderson Land. They had maybe 2 hours until sunset, 2 hours to prepare for the storm that was surely coming. Frank and Jake worked with desperate efficiency, unloading the stolen goods and hiding them in the root cellar. The money would help rebuild after this was over, if they survived. The papers would provide evidence if the law ever decided to get involved, but right now, none of that mattered as much as getting ready for the fight. Jake took position in the hayloft with the Winchester, while Frank stayed in the house with the shotgun and revolvers. They had clear lines of sight to every approach and enough ammunition to hold off an army if necessary. But ammunition meant nothing if they couldn't survive long enough to use it. The wait was agony. Every minute stretched longer than the last. Jake's muscles cramped from staying still, but he didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the southern horizon, watching for the dust cloud that would signal the gang's arrival. It came with an hour of sunlight left. A dark smudge against the orange sky, growing larger by the second. Jake's pulse quickened. This was it. No more running, no more avoiding. This was where he made his stand. The Crimson Gang arrived like an avenging storm. 8 riders this time, the full crew. They stopped at the property line just out of rifle range, their horses stamping and snorting. Even from this distance, Jake could see the rage on Cole Briggs's face, his scar standing out white against his reddened skin. "Henderson?" Briggs roared, his voice carrying across the open ground. "You made a big mistake today." Frank stepped out onto the porch, the shotgun cradled in his arms like a baby. His face was calm, resolved. "Only mistake I made was not killing you all sooner. You destroyed our camp, killed 2 of my men, stole our money. You think that makes you tough?" Briggs's horse danced sideways, sensing his rider's fury. "You just signed your death warrant, old man." "Funny thing about death warrants," Frank called back. "Sometimes they get served to the wrong people. You want this land? Come and take it. But I promise you'll pay a price that ain't worth paying." Jake watched through the rifle scope, his finger light on the trigger. He could drop Briggs from here, probably take out 2 more before they scattered. But that would still leave 5 angry outlaws with nothing to lose. Better to wait, see if there was a way to end this without more killing. Danny Cooper rode forward on his red horse, his young face twisted with confusion and fear. "Frank, I'm sorry about what happened to your hands. But you gotta understand, this is bigger than your farm. The Crimson Gang runs this territory now. Fighting them is just going to get you killed. Your brother's body ain't even cold yet, Danny. How can you ride with the men who killed him?" Frank's voice cut like a knife, each word precise and sharp. Danny's face went pale. His hands tightened on the reins, and for a moment Jake thought he might actually turn his horse around and leave. But Briggs laughed, harsh and cruel, and the moment passed. "The boy knows which side his bread is buttered on. Smart kid. Smarter than his brother, who thought he could stand against us."
Briggs spat in the dirt.
"You got one last chance, Henderson. Walk away from this place and we'll let you live. Stay, and we bury you here." Jake made a decision. He shifted his aim slightly, away from Briggs, and fired. The bullet struck the ground 6 inches in front of Danny's horse. The animal reared in panic, throwing Danny from the saddle. He hit the dirt hard and rolled, gasping for air, his hat flying off to tumble across the ground. "Next one won't miss," Jake shouted from the loft. "Unless you all turn around and ride out of here for good." Briggs's eyes found the hayloft, his hand moving to his rifle. "So the new hands got some spine after all. Good. I like killing men with spine. Makes it more interesting than shooting farmers in the back." "8 of you against 2 of us," Frank said, his voice steady and strong. "But we're on our land, we know every inch of it, and we got nothing to lose. You really want to bet your life we can't take at least half of you down before you get us?" The gang members exchanged glances. This wasn't what they had signed up for. They had joined the Crimson Gang for easy money, robbing banks and stagecoaches, not for a pitched battle against determined men who had already proven they could strike back. One rider, an older man with gray in his beard and a cautious look in his eyes, turned his horse without a word. He didn't ride fast, didn't make a show of it, just calmly walked his mount away from the confrontation. Within seconds, another followed, then a third. You ride away from the gang," Briggs snarled at them, his voice cracking with rage and disbelief. "And then I come for you next. You hear me? I come for you next." The gray-bearded man looked back over his shoulder. "Then I guess you'll have to find me first, Cole. Good luck with that." 3 more riders turned and left, including one who had been with Briggs since the beginning. Only Briggs and 2 others remained now, plus Danny still lying in the dirt trying to catch his breath. The odds had shifted dramatically. Briggs's face had gone purple with rage. His hand shook on the reins, and his horse felt the tension, dancing nervously. "You're all cowards, yellow-bellied cowards. I'll remember every one of your faces." "No," Jake called down, his rifle still trained on the group. "They're just smarter than you. They know when a fight's not worth fighting. They know when to cut their losses and move on." For a long moment, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath, balanced on a knife's edge between violence and peace. Jake's finger rested on the trigger, ready to fire the instant Briggs made a move. Frank stood on the porch with the shotgun leveled, equally prepared. Danny stood up. He dusted himself off slowly, deliberately, and walked toward the farmhouse. Not running, not sneaking, just walking with his hands held out to show they were empty. Each step seemed to cost him something, but he kept moving. "Danny, what are you doing?" Briggs' voice cracked with disbelief and fury. Danny stopped halfway between the gang and the porch. He turned to face Briggs, and when he spoke, his voice was stronger than Jake had heard before. "I'm done, Cole. My brother died trying to protect this place, trying to do the right thing. I ain't gonna help you burn it down. I ain't gonna betray his memory anymore. you ungrateful little worm. I took you in when you had nothing. I gave you purpose, gave you a place to belong. You took me in because you needed another gun. You gave me nightmares and blood on my hands. Danny's voice grew stronger with each word. Well, I'm not your gun anymore. I'm not your anything anymore. He turned back to the gang, addressing all of them. None of this is worth dying for. That silver in the creek? It's probably played out already. And even if it's not, you think you can hold this land? The law's gonna come eventually. The real law, not the sheriff we bought off. Federal marshals, maybe even the army. And when they do, we're all gonna hang. The two remaining outlaws, with Briggs, looked at each other. Jake could see the doubt spreading through them, the realization that Danny was right. One of them, a young Mexican man with a thin mustache, lowered his rifle. I'm out too, Cole. This has gone too far. The last man, older and harder, stared at Briggs for a moment, longer before shaking his head. You're on your own, boss. Good luck. They turned their horses and rode away, leaving Cole Briggs alone. He sat on his mount, shaking with fury, his hand hovering over his gun. For a moment, Jake thought he would draw, that this would end in blood no matter what. This ain't over, Briggs finally spat. You hear me, Henderson? This ain't over. I'll come back. I'll bring more men. I'll burn this place to the ground and dance on your graves. Yeah, it is, Frank said quietly, but his voice carried across the distance. Because I'm done being afraid of men like you. You want this land, you're gonna have to kill me for it. And before you do, I promise you'll pay a price that'll make you wish you'd never heard my name. Briggs stared at them for another long moment, his hand still hovering near his gun. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger, ready to end this if necessary, but then Briggs yanked his horse around with such violence that the animal stumbled. He spurred it hard, galloping away toward the setting sun, leaving a trail of dust that glowed red in the dying light. Silence fell over the farm like a blanket. Jake slowly lowered the rifle, his arms shaking from holding it steady for so long. His heart was still pounding, adrenaline making his hands tremble. Below, Frank lowered the shotgun and sat down heavily on the porch steps, suddenly looking every one of his 60-plus years. Danny stood in the yard, uncertain and alone. His shoulders were slumped, and he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The shame of his choices hung on him like a weight, visible in every line of his body. Jake climbed down from the hayloft, his legs nearly giving out when he reached the ground. The aftermath of the adrenaline hit him hard, making him dizzy. He walked slowly toward Danny and Frank, trying to steady his breathing. I don't expect forgiveness, Danny said quietly. His voice was barely audible. What I did, riding with them after they killed my brother, helping them terrorize innocent people. There ain't no excuse for that. There ain't no making it right. Frank looked at the young man for a long time, his weathered face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. Your brother was a good hand. Loyal and hardworking. Best cowboy I ever had working for me. He talked about you all the time, said you were the smart one, the one who was going to make something of yourself. Danny's face crumpled. I failed him. I failed everything he believed in. Then stop failing. Start doing better. Beginning now. Frank stood up with a grunt and walked to Danny, placing a hand on his shoulder. The past is done, son. Can't change it, can't fix it. But the future? That's still yours to write. And your brother, wherever he is, he'd want you to write it right. You mean that? After everything? I mean it. But understand this clearly. You stay here. You work for your keep. You earn honest pay for honest work. And you step out of line once, just once, and you're gone. No second chances after this. Understood? Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I swear I won't let you down. Jake watched the exchange with mixed feelings. Part of him thought Danny deserved worse, that betrayal should have harsher consequences. But another part, the part that remembered his own failures and his own need for redemption, understood that sometimes people needed a chance to make things right. Let's get inside, Frank said, looking at the darkening sky. I don't think Briggs will be back tonight, but we should keep watch just in case. And we all need food and rest. Tomorrow's going to bring its own challenges. They walked to the house together, 3 men bound by the strange events of an impossible day. Inside, Frank lit the lamps and started a fire in the stove. The domesticity of it felt surreal after the violence of the afternoon, but it was also comforting. Normal. A reminder that life went on even after bullets flew and men died. Frank heated up a pot of stew that had been simmering since morning. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and warm. He ladled it into 3 bowls and set them on the table with a loaf of bread and butter. Simple fare, but it tasted better than anything Jake could remember eating in months. They ate in silence for a while, each man lost in his own thoughts. Danny ate mechanically, his eyes red and distant. Frank ate slowly, the exhaustion of the day catching up to him. Jake ate hungrily, his body demanding fuel after the adrenaline had burned through his reserves. "What happened to your brother?" Frank asked Danny quietly. "Tell me about him." Danny set down his spoon, his hands trembling slightly. "His name was Pete. Peter Cooper. He was 2 years older than me, always looked after me after our parents died. We were working ranches together, moving from place to place, saving up money to buy our own land someday." He paused, swallowing hard. "When you hired us both, Pete was so happy. He said this was the best job we'd had, that maybe we could stay here long term, really build something. He talked about settling down, maybe finding a wife, having kids. All the normal things people want. What happened the day they killed him? The Crimson Gang showed up, 5 of them. Briggs and 4 others. They said you had to sell the land to them for a fraction of what it was worth. Said it would be easier if you cooperated. Pete told them to get lost. Said Mr. Henderson wasn't interested in selling to thieves and murderers." Danny's voice cracked. Briggs shot him, just like that. Didn't argue, didn't threaten, just drew his gun and shot Pete in the chest. He died right there in the dirt, bleeding out while I held him. "Why didn't they kill you too?" "Briggs said I could join them or join my brother. I was scared. I was a coward. So I joined them. Told myself I'd find a way to get revenge from the inside, to bring them to justice. But that was just an excuse. Truth is, I was too afraid to stand up for what was right. Too afraid to die like Pete died." Frank reached across the table and gripped Danny's shoulder. "Fear doesn't make you a coward, son. Acting on fear, letting it control you, that's what makes you a coward. But you stood up today. When it mattered, you chose right. That takes courage, and your brother would be proud of you for it." Danny nodded, tears running down his cheeks. He didn't try to hide them or wipe them away. He just let them fall, finally grieving properly for the brother he had betrayed and the time he had wasted. Jake thought about his own brother, about the guilt he carried for not being there when it mattered. He understood Danny's pain more than he wanted to admit. Maybe that's why he had stayed to fight instead of riding away. Maybe this was his chance at redemption, too. "Tell me about your brother," Frank said to Jake. The old man had a way of reading people, of knowing when they needed to talk. Jake set down his spoon and leaned back in his chair. "His name was Henry. Younger than me by 3 years, but he was always the responsible one. While I was gambling and drinking and running from my problems, Henry stayed home, helped my father with the ranch, did everything right. He was breaking a wild Mustang that nobody else could handle, and it threw him hard. He landed on his head. Died 2 days later without ever waking up." Jake's voice was flat, emotionless, the only way he could talk about it without breaking down. "I was in Kansas when it happened, running from a gambling debt. By the time I heard the news and made it back home, he was already buried. And my father looked at me like I was the worst thing he'd ever seen." "Was it your fault?" "I don't know. Maybe if I'd been there, I could have helped break that horse. Maybe I could have stopped him from trying. Or maybe it would have happened anyway, and I'm just looking for reasons to feel guilty." Jake shook his head. "All I know is that I wasn't there when my family needed me. I was running, like I always run, and Henry paid the price for my cowardice." "So you stayed here to make up for that?" Frank said. "It wasn't a question. I stayed because I'm tired of running, tired of being the man who isn't there when it counts. If I was going to die, I wanted it to be standing for something, fighting for something that mattered." Jake looked at both of them. "This farm, your lives, standing up to those outlaws, that mattered. That was worth dying for." "But you didn't die," Danny said softly. "No, we didn't. And now we have to figure out what comes next." They sat in silence for a while, 3 broken men trying to piece themselves back together. Outside, the night had fallen completely, and stars filled the sky from horizon to horizon. Somewhere out there, Cole Briggs was planning his next move. But in this kitchen, in this moment, there was peace. Frank finally stood and stretched, his back popping audibly. "I'll take first watch. You two get some sleep. Tomorrow we need to decide what to do about Briggs and that silver in the creek." "You think he'll really come back?" Danny asked. "Men like Cole Briggs don't forgive, and they don't forget. He'll be back, probably with more men, probably with a better plan. We bought ourselves some time today, but we didn't solve the problem." Frank checked his revolvers, making sure they were loaded and ready. "Get some sleep while you can."
You're going to need it. Jake and Danny found spare rooms upstairs.
The beds were simple but comfortable, with clean sheets that smelled of soap and sunshine. Jake lay down fully clothed, his revolver on the nightstand within easy reach. Through the window he could see the barn and the fields beyond, peaceful in the moonlight. He had expected to lie awake, his mind racing with everything that had happened. But exhaustion took him quickly, pulling him down into dreamless sleep. For the first time in years, he slept without nightmares, without the ghosts of his failures haunting him. He had finally done something right, finally stood his ground instead of running. Whatever came next, at least he had that. He woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Sunlight streamed through the window, bright and warm. For a moment he didn't remember where he was or how he had gotten there. Then it all came rushing back. The gunfight, the raid on the hideout, Danny's defection, the standoff at sunset. Jake dressed quickly and headed downstairs. Frank was at the stove, cooking breakfast, like nothing unusual had happened. Danny sat at the table, looking more rested, but still carrying the weight of his guilt. They both looked up when Jake entered. "Morning," Frank said cheerfully. "Hope you're hungry." "I made enough for an army." They ate breakfast together, discussing plans for the day. The immediate danger had passed, but the larger problem remained. The Crimson Gang still existed, Briggs was still out there planning revenge, and the silver in the creek made the farm a target for anyone greedy enough to try taking it. "We need to go to the law," Danny said. "Real law, not Sheriff Price. Federal marshals, or maybe the territorial governor. Show them the evidence we took from the hideout." "That's a good idea," Jake agreed. "But it means leaving the farm undefended while we make the trip. And it means trusting that the law will actually do something about it." "The law's our best bet," Frank insisted. "We can't fight the whole gang alone. We got lucky yesterday, but luck runs out. We need official help." They debated for another hour, weighing options and risks. Finally, they agreed that Danny would ride to the nearest large town, a place called Silver Creek, about 50 miles east, and try to find a federal marshal. He would take the evidence from the hideout and explain everything that had happened. Meanwhile, Jake and Frank would stay at the farm, working the land and keeping watch for any sign of trouble. If Briggs returned, they would hold him off as long as possible. If Danny succeeded in bringing back the law, the whole gang would face justice. It was a long shot, but it was better than nothing. Danny left within the hour, riding Frank's fastest horse with the evidence carefully packed in his saddlebags. He looked back once as he crested the first hill, raising his hand in farewell. Then he was gone, leaving Jake and Frank alone on the farm. "You think he'll make it?" Jake asked. "I think he'll try his best. Whether that's good enough, time will tell." Frank turned back to the house. "Come on. We got work to do. The world doesn't stop just because we're in danger." They spent the morning checking the fences and tending to the few cattle Frank owned. The work was hard but satisfying, honest labor that made Jake's muscles burn in a good way. He had spent too long drifting from place to place, doing just enough work to earn drinking money. This was different. This was building something, maintaining something, creating value instead of just taking it. Around noon, a rider appeared on the southern horizon. Jake's hand went to his gun, but Frank squinted and shook his head. "That's not one of the gang. Horse is too small. Rider's sitting wrong." As the figure got closer, they could see it was a woman, middle-aged and sturdy, riding a mule. She waved as she approached, her face friendly and open. "Afternoon, Frank," she called out. "Heard you had some excitement yesterday." "Afternoon, Betty." News travels fast, I see. In a territory this small, news travels like wildfire. She dismounted and tied her mule to the fence. "Came to see if you were okay and to bring you this." She handed Frank a basket covered with a cloth. Inside was fresh bread, a jar of preserves, and an apple pie that smelled incredible. "You didn't have to do this," Frank said, but he was smiling. "Of course I did. You're my neighbor, and neighbors look after each other. Especially when one neighbor stands up to the Crimson Gang and sends them packing." Betty's eyes moved to Jake. "You must be the new hand everyone's talking about." "Jake Marsh, ma'am. Betty Walsh. I run the farm 3 miles south of here." "My husband died 5 years back, and I've been doing it alone ever since." She looked at both of them seriously. "What you did yesterday took guts. Most folks around here have been too scared to stand up to Briggs and his gang, but you showed that they can be beaten, that they're not invincible." "You think other people will find courage from what happened?" Frank asked. "I know they will. I've already heard talk in town. Farmers and ranchers who are thinking about selling out or running away, they're reconsidering now. You gave people hope, Frank. That's worth more than silver." They invited Betty inside for coffee, and she stayed for an hour, sharing news and gossip from the surrounding area. Apparently, 3 members of the Crimson Gang had been spotted riding through town that morning, heading east. They looked scared and kept glancing over their shoulders. Word was that the gang was falling apart, that Briggs had lost control. Sheriff Price is nervous too, Betty added. He knows that if federal law comes looking into the gang's activities, his own corruption will come out. I heard he's thinking about resigning and leaving the territory. This was good news, but Jake remained cautious. A cornered animal was the most dangerous kind, and Briggs was certainly cornered now. His gang was deserting him, his hideout was destroyed, and his reputation was in tatters. Men like that either gave up or went out in a blaze of violence. After Betty left, Jake and Frank resumed their work. The afternoon passed quickly, the sun tracking across the sky. They were mending a section of fence when Jake spotted dust on the northern horizon. His heart sank. That direction led to the Copper Hills, to what remained of the gang's hideout. "We got company," he said quietly. Frank looked up, shading his eyes. "How many?" "Can't tell yet. But they're coming fast." They dropped their tools and ran for the house. Frank grabbed the shotgun while Jake took the Winchester and climbed back up to the hayloft. They settled into position and waited, watching the dust cloud grow larger. 3 riders emerged from the haze. Not the full gang, just 3. As they got closer, Jake could make out details. One was Cole Briggs, his face twisted with rage even from a distance. The other 2 were men he didn't recognize, probably guns hired from another territory, brought in to replace the members who had deserted. But something was wrong. They weren't riding in formation, weren't coordinating their approach, and as they got even closer, Jake realized why. Briggs was wounded. His left arm hung limp, and blood stained his shirt. One of the other riders was supporting him, keeping him from falling from the saddle. They stopped at the property line, the same place they had stopped yesterday. But this time there was no bravado, no threats, no posturing. Briggs slumped in his saddle, his face pale with blood loss. "Henderson," he called out, his voice weak. "I need help." Frank stepped onto the porch, the shotgun ready but not aimed. "Why should I help you after everything you've done?" "Because I'm dying." "Because I've got information you need." "Because maybe, just maybe, there's still a chance for me to do one right thing before I go." Briggs coughed and blood flecked his lips. "Please." Frank looked up at the hayloft, at Jake. They exchanged a long glance, a silent conversation about mercy and justice, about second chances and consequences. Finally, Frank nodded. "Bring him in. But the other 2 stay outside. And if this is a trick, I'll kill all of you myself." The 2 hired guns helped Briggs down from his horse and half carried him to the porch. Frank directed them to lay him on the dining room table. Up close, the wound looked bad. A bullet had caught him high in the left shoulder, probably nicking an artery. He had lost a lot of blood and would lose more without treatment. "What happened?" Frank asked, already gathering bandages and whiskey. "Federal marshals. They hit our camp at dawn, the place we moved to after you destroyed our hideout. Most of the gang scattered, but I stayed to fight. Stupid. I took a bullet and barely got away." Briggs winced as Frank cut away his shirt. "They're coming here next. They know about you, about what you did. They want to talk to you, get your testimony." "That's good news for us," Jake said from the doorway. "Maybe. But there's something else. Something you need to know before the marshals get here and before I die." Briggs gritted his teeth as Frank poured whiskey over the wound. "Sheriff Price, he wasn't just taking our money. He's part of a bigger operation. There's a man in Silver Creek, a banker named Cornelius Stone. He's been financing gangs all across the territory, using them to drive people off valuable land so he can buy it cheap and sell it for huge profits." "Why are you telling us this?" Frank demanded. "Because I'm done. Because Stone used me like a tool and then threw me away when I became inconvenient. Because maybe if I give you this information, it'll count for something when I meet my maker." Briggs's eyes were fever bright. "Stone's got hooks into everyone. Judges, lawmen, politicians. If you just stop the Crimson Gang, he'll just start another one. You need to cut off the head, not just the arms." Frank and Jake looked at each other again. This changed everything. They had thought they were just fighting a gang of outlaws, but they were actually up against a criminal empire, a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of territorial government. "Do you have proof?" Jake asked. "In my saddlebag?" "Letters between me and Stone, documents showing the money transfers, a list of all the properties his gangs have helped him acquire. It's all there." Briggs coughed again. "More blood. I kept it as insurance in case he ever tried to betray me. Guess it didn't work out the way I planned." One of the hired guns brought in the saddlebag. Inside, just as Briggs had said, was a treasure trove of evidence. Letters written in a refined hand, detailing plans to intimidate and remove farmers and ranchers, bank statements showing large sums of money flowing from Stone to various gangs, property deeds signed over under suspicious circumstances. "This is enough to hang him," Frank said, leafing through the documents. "This is enough to hang half the territorial government. Then, make sure it gets to honest hands. Make sure my last act counts for something." Briggs's voice was fading, his skin growing paler. "I ain't asking for forgiveness. I know where I'm headed, but at least let me drag Stone down with me." They worked to stabilize Briggs, but it was clear he was dying. The bullet had done too much damage, and he had lost too much blood. Within an hour, he slipped into unconsciousness. Within 2 hours, he was dead. The 2 hired guns helped dig a grave on the property, under a cottonwood tree by the creek. They laid Briggs in the ground without ceremony, without prayers, just an outlaw's grave in an unmarked spot. The hired guns took their pay from Briggs's belongings and rode away, heading back wherever they had come from. That evening, federal marshals arrived, just as Briggs had predicted. There were 4 of them, led by a hard-faced man named Marshal Wade Carter. They had come looking for the Crimson Gang and had found its destroyed remnants instead. Frank and Jake told them everything, showing them the evidence from both the gang's hideout and Briggs's saddlebag. The marshals were particularly interested in the documents about Cornelius Stone, the banker who had been pulling the strings all along. "This is bigger than we thought," Marshal Carter admitted. "We've been investigating Stone for months, but we couldn't prove anything. These documents change everything. They give us what we need to bring him down, and everyone connected to him." "What about Sheriff Price?" Frank asked. "He resigned this morning and fled the territory." "We'll catch up with him eventually, but right now, Stone is the bigger fish." Carter looked at both of them with respect. "What you two did here, standing up to the gang like that, it took real courage. Most folks would have just run." "We didn't have anywhere else to run to," Jake said simply. The marshals stayed the night, asking questions and taking detailed statements. They confirmed that the Crimson Gang was finished, its members either dead, arrested, or scattered to the winds. The remaining outlaws were being hunted down across the territory. Justice was slow but coming. Danny returned the next morning, having missed all the excitement. He was disappointed, but also relieved that everything had worked out. The marshals took additional statements from him about his time with the gang and assured him that, given his cooperation and his role in the final confrontation, he wouldn't face charges. After the marshals left, the 3 men sat on the porch watching the sun rise over the farm. The danger had passed. The gang was gone. The corrupt banker and his network of criminals were about to face justice. The farm was safe. "So what now?" Danny asked. "Now we work," Frank said. "We've got a farm to run, silver to mine, and a future to build. It won't be easy, but nothing worth having ever is." "I'd like to stay if you'll have me," Danny said. "I'd like to do honest work. Maybe start making up for all the mistakes I made." "You're welcome here, son. We could use the help." They looked at Jake, who had been quiet throughout the conversation. He gazed out at the land, at the fields waiting to be planted, at the barn that needed repairs, at the endless work that would fill their days. A month ago, he would have been planning his exit, figuring out when to slip away in the night and move on to the next place. But he wasn't that man anymore. He had found something here worth staying for, something worth fighting for. He had finally stopped running. "I'm staying too," Jake said. "For as long as you'll have me." Frank smiled and stood, extending his hand. "Then welcome home, Jake Marsh. Welcome home." They shook hands, sealing the deal. 3 men who had been strangers just days ago, now bound together by shared danger and shared purpose. They had faced down the Crimson Gang, exposed a criminal conspiracy, and earned the right to call this place home. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning dew, promising a hot day of hard work ahead, but for the first time in a long time, Jake was looking forward to it. He had found a place to belong, a reason to stay, a chance at redemption, and he wasn't going to waste it. They walked toward the barn together, ready to begin the day's work, ready to build a future worth having. Behind them, the farmhouse stood solid and strong, a testament to perseverance and courage. Above them, the sky stretched endless and blue, full of possibility. The story could have ended there, with the danger past and the heroes victorious. But life doesn't end with one victory. New challenges always arise, new obstacles always appear. And this farm, with its silver creek and its determined defenders, would face many more trials in the years to come. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. There was hope. There was home. And for 3 men who had been lost, that was more than enough.